Picture a windswept Scandinavian hillside, where a solitary, weathered stone stands sentinel against the centuries. Its surface is not smooth or blank. It's covered in cryptic, angular carvings, a language of slashes and lines that feels both ancient and strangely powerful. This isn't just a rock, it's a runestone, and for over 1,000 years, these stones have held their silence, guarding the personal stories, the epic ambitions, and the raw emotions of the Viking Age. We often envision this era through the dramatic lens of sagas and legends, tales of longships and legendary warriors whispered across generations. But what if the most authentic voices from that time aren't in manuscripts or poems, but are carved directly into the landscape itself, waiting for us to listen? That's the incredible journey we're beginning today, a journey into the shadowy world of the Vikings, not through the filter of later stories, but through the cold, hard stone they deliberately left behind. We're setting out to crack the code on Viking Age Runestones. These enigmatic monuments, scattered from the heart of Sweden to the coasts of Denmark and Norway, are far more than simple grave markers or territorial claims. They are frozen moments in time. Each inscription is a direct line to an individual who lived, loved, grieved, and ventured into the unknown. Imagine the hands that painstakingly chiseled these runes. A wealthy landowner immortalizing his status. A grieving mother commissioning a stone for her lost son. A triumphant warrior boasting of his exploits in lands we now call Istanbul or England. The runestones are their unfiltered testimony, a permanent record etched not for kings or chroniclers, but for their community and for the gods. They represent the ultimate historical mystery, a puzzle where every rune is a clue and every stone is a piece of a sprawling, continent-spanning narrative. So what profound secrets do these carved messages hold about the true Viking experience, about love, loss, power, and voyages to distant shores we can barely imagine? The answers are all there, encoded in the stone. We will walk in the footsteps of rune masters and modern linguists, deciphering messages that speak of family devotion, of shocking acts of violence, of perilous journeys across treacherous seas, and of a deep personal piety that often contradicts the popular image of the purely pagan Norseman. This is an exploration that takes us to the very heart of what it meant to live and die during one of history's most dynamic eras. Every runestone tells a story, and by learning to read them, we begin to assemble a 1,000-year-old puzzle, one breathtaking piece at a time. So what exactly are we looking at when we stand before one of these ancient monuments? At its most fundamental level, a runestone is exactly what the name implies: a large, raised stone bearing an inscription in runes. Most were erected during the Viking Age, a period spanning roughly from the late 8th to the early 12th century, and they are found predominantly in Scandinavia, with a particularly high concentration in Sweden. But to call them simple inscribed rocks is to miss their true essence. These were monumental undertakings. The stones themselves were often carefully selected for their imposing presence, sometimes standing over 3 meters tall, and they were frequently placed in highly visible locations along well-traveled roads, at assembly sites, or on family-owned land, ensuring their message would be seen by the community. The language carved into their surface is a runic alphabet. While several variations existed over the centuries, the script most commonly used during the height of the Viking Age is known as the Younger Futhark. Think of it as the streamlined, everyday writing system of its time. It condensed the older, more complex alphabet into just 16 characters, each representing a sound. Mastering this script was the work of a specialist, a rune carver, who would meticulously punch or carve these angular letters into stone. The angular shapes weren't just an artistic choice. They were profoundly practical, making the difficult work of carving into hard granite or gneiss slightly more manageable. When you look at those crisp, sharp lines, you are seeing the direct handiwork of a specific individual from 1,000 years ago. While we often associate them with graves, their purpose was far broader and more socially significant than a simple headstone. A runestone was a public declaration, a permanent broadcast to the world. They served as legal documents, confirming inheritance and land ownership. They were powerful statements of family pride and status, proclaiming a lineage's wealth and influence for all to see. Perhaps most touchingly, they were heartfelt memorials, commissioned by the living to honor the dead, often detailing not just who the person was, but how they died on a Viking expedition in the West, as a merchant in the East, or as a valued member of the household. They were never meant to be hidden or forgotten. They were designed to be enduring landmarks of a life, ensuring that a person's name and deeds would literally be set in stone, spoken aloud by passers-by for generations to come. But to truly understand the voice of a runestone, we must first become fluent in its unique alphabet, and that means recognizing that these were far more than simple letters. The runes of the Younger Futhark were a system bursting with meaning, where every character held a name, a sound, and a powerful symbolic concept. This transforms the act of reading from simple translation into something closer to interpretation. Each rune was a tiny, potent package of cultural understanding. For instance, the rune we transliterate as F was named Fe. Its core meaning was cattle, but in a society where your herd was the direct measure of your fortune, this rune instantly evoked wealth, mobile property, and prosperity. Carving this rune into a stone wasn't just spelling a word. It was invoking the very idea of abundance and success, layering the literal message with a deeper, resonant wish for the person being commemorated. This symbolic dimension weaves a rich subtext throughout many inscriptions. Another powerful example is the rune for M, called Mather, which meant man or human. Its presence could do more than just form a name. It could subtly emphasize someone's humanity, their character, or their legacy within the community. When a grieving family included this rune, they weren't just using a letter. They were reinforcing the memory of the person's essential self. This layered language means that a runestone declaring that a good farmer owned this land might be using the rune for Jefu, meaning gift or generosity, thereby quietly underscoring his reputation for hospitality alongside the factual claim. The stone doesn't just state, it suggests and amplifies through this silent, symbolic vocabulary. This fusion of writing and symbolic power reaches its most fascinating expression in the creation of bindrunes. A bindrune is an elegant and enigmatic fusion where two or more individual runes are carved to share common staves, merging into a single composite symbol. While sometimes used for simple space saving or pure decoration, many historians and philologists believe bindrunes often served a deeper, more mystical purpose. By combining runes, a carver could concentrate their symbolic power, creating a unique sigil for protection, success, or remembrance. Imagine a bindrune that wove together the rune of the god of justice and victory, with As, the rune associated with the gods themselves. This wouldn't just be a clever bit of spelling. It would be a potent, condensed plea for divine favor and triumph, a permanent charm etched in the stone. These composite symbols remind us that for the Vikings, writing could be an act of magic, a way to directly influence the world through the power of encoded meaning. So, when we look at a runestone, we are reading on two levels simultaneously, deciphering the straightforward narrative of the text, while also sensing the deeper currents of symbolism and intent flowing just beneath the surface of the carved lines. With this powerful symbolic language at their disposal, the Vikings most frequently used it to confront one of life's most profound and universal experiences, the loss of a loved one. While runestones served many purposes, their most common and emotionally resonant function was as permanent memorials to the dead. Across the Scandinavian landscape, thousands of these stones stand as silent, stoic witnesses to personal grief, transforming private sorrow into a public and everlasting declaration. They follow a remarkably consistent and poignant formula, a pattern so widespread it acts like a cultural fingerprint. The inscription typically begins with a direct and powerful phrase that cuts straight to the heart of the matter. You will most often see words equivalent to "in memory of" or "after," followed by the name of the departed. What makes this formula so deeply human is what comes next. It almost always names the person who commissioned the stone, explicitly stating their relationship to the deceased. We read phrases like "raised by his father," "had this stone carved for her husband," or "and their brothers made this bridge in his memory." This simple structural element does something extraordinary. It pulls us directly into the intimate social fabric of the Viking Age. We are not just learning that a man named Ulf died. We are being told that a specific woman, likely named Gyrid, lost her husband, and that her grief and love were so significant that she made sure everyone who passed this stone would know about it for centuries. The stone becomes a triangulation of relationships, forever linking the deceased, the bereaved, and the entire community that would see it. Consider the profound emotional weight carried by a stone like the one at Hillersur in Sweden. Its inscription tells the story of a woman named Gerlog, who begins by memorializing her first husband. But then, in a heartbreaking cascade, it goes on to record the deaths of her children, her second husband, and finally, the grandson who was meant to carry on the line. This isn't a simple grave marker. It is a family saga of overwhelming loss carved into granite, a public testament to a woman's resilience in the face of unimaginable personal tragedy. Her story, and the stories of her entire family, would have been completely lost to history were it not for this single, enduring monument. Similarly, the stone from Gardstanga in Sweden, raised by a man named Toki in memory of his brother, ends with the simple, crushing declaration: "He drowned with all his crew. And this I had raised after my brother." In that one sentence, we feel the vast, impersonal danger of the sea and the very personal, devoted act of a brother ensuring that this collective tragedy did not erase an individual's name. Beyond the raw expression of grief, these memorial stones served a second, equally vital purpose that was deeply intertwined with the social and legal realities of the time. They functioned as powerful legal documents, set in stone for all to see, by publicly declaring, "I am the son who inherits after my father," or "This woman is the rightful heir to this farm." A runestone legitimized inheritance and secured the family's legacy against any potential disputes. In a society without centralized record keeping, the runestone was the ultimate proof of ownership and lineage. Placing it on the family's land was a permanent claim, a way to ensure that property and status passed smoothly to the next generation. This act of remembrance was therefore not just an emotional release. It was a crucial social duty, a strategic move to protect the family's future and reinforce its standing within the community. The stones served both the heart and the law, honoring the past while securing the future, making it an indispensable part of Viking Age life and death. Yet for all the deeply personal stories of loss and inheritance carved into Scandinavian bedrock, the runestones also tell a far grander, more expansive narrative, one that charts the incredible journeys of the Vikings across the known world. When we shift our gaze from the local family farm to the wider European and Asian landscape, these stones transform from intimate memorials into something even more remarkable, a sprawling stone-cut travelogue of an entire age. While the Icelandic sagas give us epic, literary accounts of exploration written down centuries later, the runestones provide us with direct, contemporary evidence, naming real people who ventured to real, far-flung places. They are the ultimate primary source, carved by the participants themselves or by their proud families back home, broadcasting their reach and ambition for all their neighbors to see. Among the most telling of these global markers are the so-called England runestones. Found not in England, but surprisingly, in great numbers across Sweden, these monuments commemorate men who traveled west across the sea. Their inscriptions are often stunningly specific. They don't just say a man went raiding. They state that he received payment in England. This is a direct reference to the historical phenomenon of danegeld, the vast protection money paid by English kingdoms to persuade Viking armies to leave their lands in peace. A stone in Uppland, for example, proudly declares that a man named Ulf Borista took not one, but 3 such payments in England. Imagine the impact of that statement in his home village. The stone isn't merely marking his death. It's a permanent bragging right, a receipt for immense wealth earned through intimidation and martial prowess, set in stone for generations to admire. These inscriptions move us from the vague notion of Viking raids to the tangible economic reality of them, showing how these expeditions fueled the economies and elevated the status of individuals back in Scandinavia. The Viking world, however, stretched far beyond the British Isles. The runestones reveal an Eastern orientation that is just as impressive. Many inscriptions mention voyages to the Byzantine Empire, which the Norse called Miklagard, or the Great City. This was their name for Constantinople, the dazzling capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, a metropolis of unimaginable wealth and sophistication compared to the Scandinavian homelands. To have served there was a mark of supreme prestige. The famous runestones at Ed in Sweden commemorate a local leader who not only died in Miklagard, but crucially held a command there. This tells us that Norsemen weren't just passing mercenaries. They could rise to positions of significant authority within the elite Varangian Guard, the personal bodyguards of the Byzantine emperor. Another stone speaks of a man who died in the east among the Greeks. These brief mentions open a window onto a world of long-distance employment, cultural exchange, and military service that connected the fjords of Scandinavia to the heart of the Mediterranean world. Perhaps the most exotic destinations recorded are found in the name Serkland. This term, appearing on several runestones, is widely believed by scholars to refer to the Muslim lands of the Middle East, possibly the Abbasid Caliphate. A remarkable stone from the Swedish island of Gotland tells of a man named Atrafin who fell in Serkland. The journey to get there was an epic undertaking in itself, sailing down the rivers of Eastern Europe, traversing the Caspian Sea, or navigating the Mediterranean. This single word, Serkland, encapsulates a vast network of trade routes, bringing luxury goods like Islamic silver coins, silks, and spices back to the north. When a family raised a stone saying their son died in Serkland, they were saying he was part of that global network, a traveler to the very edges of their known world. These stones provide concrete archaeological proof for the incredible geographic scope of Viking activity, evidence that is often more reliable and contemporary than the later saga accounts. They map a world where a man from a Swedish farm could fight in Constantinople, trade in Baghdad, and take tribute in London, with his story forever immortalized in runes on a granite slab back home. But as the Viking Age progressed, a profound transformation began to sweep across Scandinavia, one that would fundamentally reshape the cultural landscape and leave an indelible mark on the runestones themselves. This was the slow, complex, and often forceful conversion to Christianity. The stones, ever the faithful chroniclers of their time, document this spiritual revolution with stunning clarity, allowing us to trace the erosion of the Old Norse pantheon and the rise of the cross, not through dusty manuscripts, but through the very granite that dotted the countryside. We can witness a dramatic shift in the divine forces people called upon. The earlier, pre-Christian inscriptions often contain powerful invocations to the Aesir, the familiar gods of the Viking worldview. You find stones where a carver might dedicate his work to Thor, asking the god of thunder to hallow or protect the memorial. These are direct, personal appeals to the deities who governed a world of storms, war, and fate. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, a new vocabulary begins to appear. The names of Odin and Thor fade, replaced by a new, singular god. The most telling symbol of this change is the cross itself. On later runestones, the Christian cross isn't just a minor decoration. It often forms the central, dominant visual element of the entire monument, intricately carved and integrated into the runic text. The messages evolve too. The old boasts of successful Viking expeditions are joined, and then supplanted by humble, standardized Christian prayers. Inscriptions begin to conclude with phrases like, "God and God's mother help his soul," or the simple, heartfelt plea, "May God rest his soul." This represents a seismic shift in the conception of the afterlife. The focus moves from earthly glory and a place in Valhalla to the salvation of the soul and divine mercy. The runestone was no longer just a message for the community. It had become a prayer directed toward heaven. No single monument captures this historical pivot more perfectly than the great Jelling stones in Denmark. Erected by King Harald Bluetooth in the 10th century, these are not just runestones. They are a political and religious manifesto carved in rock. The larger of the two is often called Denmark's birth certificate, and for good reason. Its inscription is a masterclass in blending old and new authority to consolidate power. It begins in a way any Viking would understand, boasting of secular conquest. King Harald commanded this monument made in memory of Gorm, his father, and in memory of Theovi, his mother, that Harald who won for himself all of Denmark and Norway. This is the language of a traditional warrior king, establishing his legitimacy through military might and familial piety. But then comes the revolutionary punchline, "and made the Danes Christian." In that one breathtaking clause, Harald broadcasts a new reality. His power is not just territorial, it is spiritual. He is taking credit for the mass conversion of an entire people. The stone itself physically embodies this fusion. It features a beautifully carved, interwoven pattern that forms a prominent cross, and on one face, there is an image of Christ, not as a suffering figure, but as a triumphant, almost heroic character, entangled in what appears to be branches. This imagery was likely designed to make the new faith more palatable, presenting Christ in a familiar, powerful guise. The gelling stone is the ultimate piece of royal propaganda, using the traditional medium of the runestone to announce the death of the old gods and the birth of a new Christian kingdom. This evolution wasn't always a clean break. For a period, there was a fascinating syncretism, a blending of old and new beliefs that played out on the stone surfaces. Some runestones from this transitional era feature both a cross and imagery from Norse mythology, like the mighty serpent Jormungandr. It seems that for many people, adopting the new Christian God didn't necessarily require an immediate and total rejection of the entire old worldview. The runes themselves, a system once deeply connected to pagan magic and the god Odin, were now used to carve prayers to the Christian God, demonstrating the incredible adaptability of the tradition. The medium remained the same, but the message was utterly transformed, showing a society in the midst of redefining its relationship with the divine, the afterlife, and its own identity. This wasn't merely a change in religion. It was a complete recalibration of the Viking soul, and the runestones are the permanent, public record of that profound internal and external shift. While the gradual conversion of Scandinavia is written across thousands of stones, no single monument captures this earth-shattering shift more dramatically or authoritatively than the twin gelling stones in Denmark. These aren't just runestones. They are a royal proclamation, a spiritual declaration, and a nation's birth certificate, all carved into two massive, imposing blocks of granite. The story they tell is a family saga of the highest order, beginning with King Gorm the Old, who raised the smaller of the two stones in memory of his wife, Thyra. His inscription is powerful, but it is the language of the old world, calling Thyra Denmark's adornment, a phrase that praises her as a treasure to the land, but doesn't yet define that land as a unified Christian kingdom. Gorm was a king of a people, ruling in a time when power was fragmented and the old gods still held sway. It is his son, Harald Bluetooth, who truly reshapes history with his stone. His monument is colossal, a statement of absolute power that deliberately overshadows his father's. The inscription on Harald's stone is arguably the most important historical document from the entire Viking Age, and it reads with the crisp clarity of a political manifesto. It states, King Harald commanded this monument be made in memory of Gorm, his father, and in memory of Thyra, his mother, that Harald who won for himself all of Denmark and Norway and made the Danes Christian. In that one breathtaking sentence, Harald does three revolutionary things. He establishes his filial duty, he boasts of his unprecedented military conquests, uniting Denmark and parts of Norway under one crown, and he announces the most profound cultural transformation imaginable, the forced conversion of his entire people to a new faith. This is the very first time the name Denmark appears as a unified national concept, making this stone the literal bedrock of Danish national identity. But the power of Harald's stone isn't confined to its words alone. The carvings that cover its three faces are a masterpiece of symbolic communication, designed to be understood by both the literate elite and the common person. One side features a massive, struggling beast, a symbol from the Old Norse animal art style, representing the chaotic, untamed forces of the pagan world. On another face, we see a great serpent-like creature, another potent relic of the old mythology. But it is the third face that presents Harald's ultimate argument. Here, a beautifully intricate, interwoven pattern forms a prominent Christian cross, dominating the surface, and at the center of this cross is the oldest known depiction of Jesus Christ in all of Scandinavia. This Christ is not the suffering, crucified figure of later medieval art. He is portrayed as a triumphant, almost heroic figure, with his arms outstretched as if entangled in the branches of the cross itself, which some interpret as a deliberate echo of the sacred tree Yggdrasil from Norse belief. This visual fusion was a stroke of political and religious genius. For a population deeply attached to its warrior ethos and familiar symbols, this image presented Christ not as a victim, but as a victorious Lord, a divine king worthy of allegiance. Harold Bluetooth was skillfully rebranding Christianity for a Viking audience, using the visual language of power and triumph to make the new faith more palatable. The gelling stones, therefore, stand as the ultimate bridge between two eras. They mark the precise moment when a collection of warring chieftaincies began to coalesce into a Christian kingdom, when the authority of a single king, endorsed by a single god, began to override the old, decentralized loyalties. They are not merely historical artifacts. They are the moment Denmark was invented, a story of faith, power, and identity, forever set in stone. But for all their power as memorials and records of global exploration, the runestones also held a much darker, more unsettling purpose, one that connects directly to the deep-seated Viking belief in the supernatural power of the runes themselves. Beyond messages of love and lineage, some inscriptions cross into the realm of curses and protective magic, transforming these stones from simple monuments into objects of fear and power, deliberately imbued with a force intended to harm or defend. This is the shadowy intersection of writing and witchcraft, where the rune carver wasn't just a craftsman but potentially a sorcerer, weaving spells into the very stone. The most direct and chilling examples of this are the curse stones, inscriptions specifically designed to protect a grave from desecration with terrifying threats. These were not polite requests. They were legalistic, supernatural deterrents, promising calamity and death to anyone foolish enough to violate the resting place. A classic formula found on several stones translates to something like, "He who breaks this monument or drags it away from here shall become a sorcerer, an outcast." In the tightly knit, honor-based society of the Viking Age, being declared an outcast was a fate arguably worse than death, meaning complete ejection from the protection of the law and the community. Other curses were even more visceral. Some stones threaten that the violator will rot in the ground like a beast, devoid of Christian burial, while others invoke a more active, grim justice, suggesting the transgressor will be slain himself. Perhaps the most famous and fearsome of these is the Stentoffen stone from Sweden. Its inscription is a stark litany of power and punishment. It begins by honoring a leader and describing animal sacrifices for good harvests, but then it delivers a devastating curse aimed at anyone who would flee the land or commit betrayal. The curse reads, "I foresee perdition, a rotting death." The word used for perdition is runar, a word that directly connects this doom to the magical power of the runes. This isn't just a warning. It is a prophetic condemnation, a declaration that the runes themselves have foreseen and now dictate this terrible fate for the wrongdoer. It presents the stone not just as a marker, but as an active agent of supernatural justice. Beyond these explicit curses, many stones feature cryptic words and symbols that scholars believe were potent magical formulas. The most debated of these is the word alu. This term appears on numerous runestones, amulets, and artifacts, often at the very end of an inscription. Its literal meaning is generally accepted to be ale, but its contextual use suggests a far deeper, mystical significance. In a culture where the sharing of ale was central to sacred oaths, community bonding, and ritual toasts to the gods, a loo is thought to represent far more than a beverage. It likely functioned as a protective charm, a word of blessing and warding. By inscribing a loo, the carver was perhaps sealing the monument with a layer of spiritual protection, invoking the binding power of the sacred drink to hallow the stone and guard its message and the person it commemorated. It was a single word that condensed an entire world of ritual meaning into 3 powerful runes. This magical function extended beyond graves to the world of the living. Runestones were also used as territorial markers, and on the lawless frontiers, a simple claim of ownership might not have been enough. By inscribing a stone with powerful runic formulas or symbols, a landowner could be doing more than just stating a fact. He could be magically fortifying his claim, placing a supernatural fence around his property that threatened any trespasser with bad luck or divine wrath. We see this in stones that feature intricate, labyrinth-like symbols or carvings of weapons, which may have been intended to project power and danger. The Birketorp stone in Sweden, standing alone in a field, bears a chilling curse warning that a prophesying destruction will fall upon a person who breaks the monument. Its isolated location suggests it was a boundary marker, and its terrifying inscription was the magical enforcement of that boundary. These stones were more than signs. They were sentinels armed with words of power, ensuring that even in the owner's absence, his claim was defended by forces most people would not dare to challenge. This brings us to one of the most extraordinary and unique runestones ever discovered, a monument that fuses the warrior ethos of the Vikings with the soul of a poet. On the island of Öpland, off the coast of Sweden, stands the Karlovy runestone. At first glance, it appears much like any other, a weathered granite block inscribed with runes. But the words it carries are anything but ordinary. This is not a simple memorial, it is a literary time capsule. The Karlovy stone contains the one and only complete skaldic poem from the Viking Age that has survived to this day, preserved not in a later medieval manuscript, but carved directly into the stone in its original context. It is a masterpiece frozen in time, offering us direct, unmediated access to the sophisticated mind of a Viking Age poet. The inscription is a eulogy for a local chieftain named Sibbi. But the language used to praise him is not straightforward prose. It is composed in the incredibly complex and rigid poetic form known as drottkvitt, or the courtly meter. This was the highest form of Norse poetry, the kind composed for kings and chieftains in royal halls, a form governed by a labyrinth of rules. Each line had to have a specific number of syllables. Each line required alliteration, where key words began with the same sound. And most challengingly, every line had to contain intricate patterns of internal rhyme. Composing in drottkvitt was the pinnacle of a skald's art, a verbal feat of immense skill and intellect. The fact that this poem was deemed worthy of being carved permanently into stone tells us that Sibbi was a man of immense stature, and the poet who honored him was a master of his craft. To truly appreciate the genius of this inscription, we need to translate it and then pull apart its intricate layers. The poem reads, "Hidden lies the fighter, whom the greatest deeds followed, the destroyer of the island of the storm of the battle high flame under this, the tree of the gallows goddess. A more honest battle's strong god of the wagon of the mighty ground of Sea King will not rule over the land in Denmark." At first hearing, this sounds like a beautiful but confusing riddle. That is the entire point. The power of skaldic verse lies in its use of kenning's dense, multi-layered metaphorical expressions that were the standard vocabulary of this poetry. Let's unravel the central kenning used to describe Sibbi, the destroyer of the island of the storm of the battle high flame. We start from the inside and work our way out. The battle-high flame is a kenning for sword, as a sword is a flashing, flame-like object in the height of battle. The storm of the sword is therefore a poetic way to say battle, which is a storm of clashing swords. The island of the battle is a kenning for shield, as a warrior's shield is his island of defense in the storm of combat. Therefore, the destroyer of the shield is, finally, a warrior, a man so powerful in battle he can smash his enemy's primary defense. This single, cascading metaphor condenses the entire concept of a formidable fighter into one brilliant, intellectually demanding phrase. The poem doesn't stop there. It describes the runestone itself with another beautiful kenning, calling it the tree of the gallows goddess. The gallows goddess is a reference to the goddess Odin, the god of the hanged. A tree of Odin is a kenning for a monument or memorial stone, likening this raised stone to a sacred tree dedicated to the god. The poet is saying, in the most elevated terms possible, that Sibi's memory is forever rooted in this sacred, Odin-hallowed stone. The final lines of the poem are a boast about Sibi's character, stating that a more honest and powerful ruler will not be found. The ground of Sea King is a kenning for the land, as the king of the sea is the Sea King, whose ground is the land he rules over. The wagon of the land is a ship, and the god of the ship is therefore a sea warrior or a ruler. Every single component of this poem is consciously crafted to operate on multiple levels of meaning simultaneously. The immense cultural value of the Karlovi stone cannot be overstated. For centuries, we have known about this complex skaldic tradition from the Icelandic sagas, which were written down 200 years or more after the end of the Viking Age. Scholars have long debated how faithfully these later manuscripts represented the actual oral poetry of the Viking era. The Karlovi runestone puts that debate to rest. It is contemporary, verifiable proof that these incredibly intricate poems were not a later literary invention. They were being composed, recited, and most importantly, considered valuable enough to be permanently memorialized in runes during the height of the Viking Age. It proves that the men who sailed the longships and wielded the axes also valued linguistic artistry and intellectual prowess. The stone is a bridge, connecting the physical world of warriors and chieftains with the sophisticated intellectual culture that flourished alongside it, revealing a Viking age that was as rich in poetry as it was in power. Yet for all the poetic mastery of Karlovi, the ultimate runic challenge, the Everest of epigraphy, stands not on an island coast, but in the churchyard of Rurk in Östergötland, Sweden. Here resides the Rurk runestone, a monument so dense with text, so baffling in its composition, and so hotly debated in its meaning that it has captivated and confounded scholars for generations. This isn't just a runestone. It is the world's longest runic inscription, a sprawling tapestry of over 760 characters covering all 5 of its sides, transforming a single block of granite into the most complex riddle of the Viking Age. While most rune stones deliver their message with a certain poignant clarity, the Rurk feels like a coded broadcast, a frantic and monumental effort to record something of immense importance, something that couldn't be said plainly. It is the runologist's ultimate puzzle box, a perfect centerpiece for our exploration because, even today, no one can say with absolute certainty what its true purpose is. The stone was raised in the early 9th century by a man named Varen in memory of his son, Vamad. This much seems straightforward, as the inscription begins with the familiar memorial formula we've seen countless times. But almost immediately, it spirals into a breathtakingly complex and enigmatic text. The inscription is carved in a mixture of the common Younger Futhark and the older, more obscure Elder Futhark, a deliberate choice that adds an archaic, almost ritualistic layer to the writing. It's as if Varen, or the rune carver he employed, was reaching back to the oldest form of the script to lend his words extra power and authority. The text is not a single, flowing narrative. Instead, it's structured in a series of distinct sections, many of which are introduced as riddles or cryptic questions, challenging the reader, or perhaps the gods themselves, to decipher their meaning. One of the most astonishing aspects of the inscription is its incredible geographical and historical scope. In the middle of this Swedish churchyard, the text makes a startling reference to a figure from continental European history, Theodoric the Great, the legendary king of the Ostrogoths who ruled Italy in the 5th and 6th centuries. The stone asks, who was the avenger of Theodoric? This single line is a historical bombshell. It reveals that stories of a Gothic hero king who lived centuries earlier and thousands of miles away were not only known in the rural heartlands of Scandinavia, but were considered significant enough to be carved into a permanent memorial. This connects the local world of Varen and his dead son to the grand sweep of European history and legend, suggesting that the Norse saw themselves as part of a wider, heroic world. But the stone's mysteries only deepen from there. It is filled with allusions to battles and conflicts, some of which seem to be historical and others purely mythological. It speaks of 20 kings lying dead on a battlefield, of a fierce fight between two brothers, and of a great war that was fought for the sake of a people. These could be references to local power struggles, ancient tribal legends, or even events from the mythic past. The text then weaves these martial themes together with profound cosmological concerns, posing riddles about the sun and the moon, and speaking of the god Odin and his slain son, Balder. Some of the most cryptic passages seem to describe a cataclysmic winter, a time without sun and with repeated warfare, which many scholars interpret as a reference to Fimbulwinter, the great winter that precedes Ragnarok, the apocalyptic battle, and the end of the world in Norse mythology. So, what does it all mean? Why would a grieving father compose such an impossibly complex monument for his son? The theories are as varied as they are fascinating. The traditional interpretation holds that it is, first and foremost, an elaborate memorial. In this view, Varen was a powerful chieftain, and his son's death was a catastrophic blow. By recording these vast tales of heroes, gods, and cosmic cycles, Varen was placing his son's death within the grandest possible context, equating his personal loss with the great tragedies of legend and myth. He was saying, in effect, that his son's death was an event of world-shattering importance. Another compelling theory, which has gained significant traction in recent years, suggests the stone is a sophisticated piece of political propaganda. The early 9th century was a time of profound climate stress, with well-documented periods of extreme cold leading to famine and social unrest. In this reading, the references to Fimbulwinter are not just mythic allusions, but descriptions of a very real environmental crisis. Varen, as a local leader, might have been using the stone to legitimize his family's power by linking their lineage and their struggles to the gods and heroes of old, framing their leadership as essential for surviving this perceived apocalyptic era. The stone becomes a claim to authority, a declaration that only his lineage could guide the people through this divine punishment. Perhaps the most audacious modern theory proposes that the entire inscription is, in fact, a complex memory aid, a physical hard drive designed to preserve a vast body of oral poetry and knowledge. According to this interpretation, The riddles and cryptic phrases are not meant to be read as a linear text, but as mnemonic triggers for reciting entire epic poems about Theodoric ancient battles and the myths of Ragnarok. The stone was a backup, created in a time of crisis to ensure this priceless cultural knowledge would not be lost, with Varen's son's memorial serving as the sacred justification for this monumental act of preservation. The true genius of the Rurk runestone is that it likely embodies all of these purposes simultaneously. It is a father's profound lament for his child, a chieftain's bold claim to political power, and a scholar's desperate attempt to save his culture's knowledge from oblivion. It refuses to be pinned down to a single, simple explanation, which is precisely why new interpretations are still being proposed, using advanced digital imaging and linguistic analysis. It stands as the ultimate testament to the fact that for the Vikings, runes were far more than an alphabet. They were a technology for capturing memory, a weapon for wielding power, and a vessel for confronting the greatest mysteries of life, death, and the cosmos itself. This incredible stone, with its dense web of ancient conflicts and cosmic fears, might feel like a riddle permanently locked in the past, but the quest to understand the Rurk runestone is anything but over. In fact, we are living in the most exciting era of Rurk scholarship, where traditional runology is being supercharged by cutting-edge technology and interdisciplinary research, leading to theories that are as startling as they are persuasive. One of the most compelling modern interpretations emerged in a landmark 2020 study, where a team of researchers proposed a radical new context for the entire inscription. They suggested that the stone is not just about mythic battles, but is a direct, desperate reaction to a very real and terrifying climate catastrophe. The team cross-referenced the estimated date of the stone's creation, the early 9th century, with newly refined data from ice cores drilled from Greenland's glaciers. These ice cores act as a time capsule of Earth's atmosphere, and they revealed something startling. The period around the time the Rurk was carved saw a series of massive volcanic eruptions, likely in the tropics. These eruptions pumped immense amounts of ash and sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere, blocking sunlight and causing a dramatic global cooling event. The evidence points to bitterly cold summers, widespread crop failure, and consequent famine. For an agricultural society like the one Varen ruled over, this would have been an existential crisis. It would have felt like the end of the world. Rereading the Rurk's inscription through this lens of environmental trauma, the cryptic passages suddenly snap into a chilling new focus. The riddles about the sun and the moon could be literal descriptions of a darkened, dust-filled sky. The repeated mentions of warfare might not just be boasts of past glory, but a record of the desperate, bloody conflicts over scarce resources that such a famine would inevitably trigger. Most powerfully, the allusions to Fimbulwinter, the great winter of Norse prophecy that heralds Ragnarok, transform from abstract mythology into a lived reality. In this interpretation, Varen wasn't just referencing old legends. He was documenting what he believed was happening around him. By connecting the death of his son to this divine punishment, he was elevating his personal tragedy to a cosmic scale, framing his loss as a sacrifice in a battle for the very survival of his world. This theory powerfully repositions the Rurk as a monument to human resilience in the face of environmental collapse, a Stone Age chronicle of a society grappling with a climate emergency. While this climate theory provides a gripping historical context, another technological revolution is now providing the tools to scrutinize the stone's very surface in ways previously unimaginable. The field of runology is entering a new digital age, driven by artificial intelligence and advanced imaging techniques. For centuries, scholars have had to rely on their eyesight and careful rubbings to decipher worn and damaged runes. Now, three-dimensional laser scanning can create hyper-detailed digital models of a runestone, allowing researchers to manipulate light sources and examine the depth and angle of each individual carve from every possible angle. This can reveal tool marks, clarify weathered sections, and even detect preliminary sketches made by the carver that are invisible to the naked eye. This is where artificial intelligence enters the picture. Researchers are beginning to train AI algorithms on these high-resolution scans. The goal is to teach these systems to recognize the unique handwriting of different rune carvers across thousands of inscriptions. An AI can analyze the subtle nuances in the shape of a rune, the curvature of a line, or the angle of an intersection with a consistency and speed no human can match. For a stone like Rurk, which uses multiple runic alphabets, an AI could potentially identify if different sections were carved by different people, or if the entire monument was the work of a single, incredibly skilled master. It could scan through the entire corpus of known runestones and find previously unnoticed connections, perhaps identifying other stones carved by the same hand, which could help map the movements of these intellectual artisans across Scandinavia. This digital toolkit opens up the possibility of finding patterns that have eluded human scholars for 1,200 years. The Rurk's structure, with its distinct sections and riddles, might hold a mathematical or cryptographic key that an AI could detect. The AI isn't meant to replace the runologist's intuition and deep cultural knowledge. Rather, it acts as a powerful collaborator, processing vast amounts of data to present new possibilities and correlations for human experts to interpret. This partnership between human and machine is opening a thrilling new chapter in our understanding of the Viking mind. We are no longer just staring at the Rurk runestone, hoping for a flash of insight. We are now actively interrogating it with the most sophisticated tools of the 21st century, peeling back the layers of time to listen, at last, to the full story it has been trying to tell us. If the Rurk stone represents the deep philosophical mystery of the runic tradition, then the Swedish region of Uppland is its vibrant, beating heart, a place where the sheer volume of stones transforms individual whispers into a roaring chorus. While rune stones are scattered across Scandinavia, their distribution is strikingly uneven, and the undisputed epicenter is Uppland, the fertile land surrounding what is now Stockholm. This single region is home to a staggering figure, nearly 1,500 known runestones. That's roughly 1/3 of all the runestones in the entire world, concentrated in one area. This isn't a random scattering. It's a veritable forest of stone, a dense archaeological record that allows us to do something remarkable. Not just read individual stories, but map an entire society in breathtaking detail. So why here? What made 11th century Uppland the perfect storm for runestone raising? The answer lies in a powerful convergence of new wealth, fierce political competition, and profound spiritual change. This was a period following the Viking expeditions, when vast amounts of silver danegeld from England and trade wealth from the east had flowed back into the Swedish homeland. Local chieftains and powerful families found themselves newly rich, but in a society where old structures were shifting. At the same time, the wave of Christianization, so powerfully declared at Jelling, was washing over Sweden. This created a potent cocktail of motivation. Erecting a runestone became the ultimate way for an upwardly mobile family to do three things at once: First, to publicly display their new wealth and social standing. Second, to legally solidify their claim to the land that generated that wealth. And third, to loudly proclaim their adherence to the new, powerful Christian faith, aligning themselves with the future. The sheer density of monuments in Uppland turns the landscape itself into a historical document. Because so many stones name the people who raised them and the person being commemorated, historians can painstakingly reconstruct vast family networks stretching across the region. We can see how power and property were consolidated through strategic marriages and alliances. For instance, a cluster of stones might reveal that a woman named Ingrid was commemorated by her husband on one stone, by her sons on another farther away, and that her brothers appear on a third stone near a key waterway. This isn't just a set of isolated facts. It's a map of a dynasty, showing how one family strategically placed its monuments to signal its influence over a wide territory. The runestones were their billboards of power, visible to anyone traveling the roads and waterways. This competitive spirit is palpable in the stones themselves. Take the famous Jarlabank stones in Täby. Jarlabank was an immensely powerful 11th century chieftain, and he left behind a series of monuments that are less about grief and more about pure, unadulterated boasting. One of his inscriptions reads with stunning audacity, "Jarlabank had these stones raised in memory of himself while he was alive, and he made this bridge for his soul. And he alone owned all of Täby. God help his soul. This is a man so confident in his status that he built his own memorial, ensuring he would get the credit. The bridge he built was likely both a physical causeway that controlled local travel and a spiritual metaphor, echoing the Christian idea of pious works, easing the passage to salvation." Jarlabank wasn't just claiming land. He was shaping the entire landscape, both physical and spiritual, to serve his legacy. Beyond individual boasts, the Uppland stones collectively document the final, fascinating stage of the Christian conversion. The older stones in the region might feature a simple cross, but the later ones from the height of the 11th century are often covered in elaborate Christian ornamentation, intricate cross designs, praying figures, and even images of church buildings. The prayer formula also becomes standardized, with phrase after phrase ending with the plea, "May God and God's mother help his soul." This repetition shows the new faith becoming embedded in the cultural script. Yet, even here, the old ways persisted in a new guise. The act of raising a stone was a traditional, public display of status, but its message was now directed firmly toward the Christian heaven. These families were using a deeply rooted pagan medium to broadcast their membership in a new religious and political order, ensuring they remained prominent players in both this world and the next. The Uppland collection is therefore more than a graveyard. It is a living panorama of a society in rapid, ambitious transition, using the ancient power of the rune to navigate its way into a new age. This incredible concentration of power and piety in places like Uppland reveals just how deeply runestones were woven into the social fabric. But to truly understand that fabric, we need to examine one of its most vital and often overlooked threads, the women of the Viking Age. When we picture this society, our minds often leap to bearded warriors and adventurous explorers. Yet the runestones themselves present a far more nuanced and compelling story. A significant number of these monuments were not just raised for women, but were commissioned by them. Across Scandinavia, we find countless inscriptions that begin with the powerful phrase, "So and so raise this stone in memory of." And a remarkable portion of those names belong to women. This isn't a minor footnote. It is a profound historical testimony. It tells us that certain women possess the legal authority, the economic means, and the social standing to initiate these costly public projects. They were not passive figures in the background. They were active patrons, using the most permanent medium available to shape their family's legacy and express their own identity and power. Consider the story of a woman named Thora. On a stone in Hellestad, Sweden, we learn that she raised a magnificent monument in memory of her husband, a man named Tok. The inscription doesn't merely state his name. It proudly declares that he was a man who fled not at Uppsala, a phrase that suggests he died a heroic death in a famous battle, an event recorded in other sources. But the true power of this stone lies not in Tok's bravery, but in Thora's action. In the wake of her husband's death, she didn't fade into obscurity. She took charge. She hired a skilled rune carver, selected a stone, and financed its erection. This single act broadcasts several things simultaneously: that she had control over substantial wealth, likely the wealth she inherited from her husband, that she had the legal right to make such a significant public statement, and that she intended for her entire community to remember her husband's valor through her own decisive agency. Thora ensured that her family's story would be told, and she positioned herself squarely as the author of that narrative. This pattern repeats itself across the landscape. Women like Ragnhild on the Hillersyr stone, who we encountered earlier, orchestrated complex family memorials that wove together stories of multiple husbands and children. Another poignant example comes from a stone in Dinna, Norway, commissioned by a woman named Gunvor in memory of her daughter, Astrid. The inscription is beautiful in its simplicity, but the stone itself is spectacular, featuring one of the earliest known Christian nativity scenes in all of Scandinavia, carved in vibrant red paint. Gunvor wasn't just remembering her daughter. She was making a bold statement of faith and cultural sophistication, using the newest artistic trends to honor her child. These women were far more than mourners. They were curators of memory and managers of family prestige. What does this tell us about the legal and economic rights of women in Viking society? The evidence from the runestones suggests that, while the society was undoubtedly patriarchal, women of certain status enjoyed notable protections and freedoms. Norse laws, particularly those codified later in Iceland, granted women the right to inherit property, to represent themselves in legal disputes, and to control their own dowries. The runestones provide contemporary proof that these rights were not just theoretical. A woman who could commission a runestone was a woman who controlled capital. The process was expensive, requiring payment for the raw stone, its transportation, and the skilled labor of the rune master. This was not a trivial expense. It was a major investment. By making this investment, a woman was publicly demonstrating her control over family resources. She was, in effect, acting as the head of her household, ensuring that inheritance passed correctly and that the family's name and property claims were secured against any challengers. In a world without banks or paper deeds, the runestone was a powerful legal instrument, and women were using it. Beyond the stones raised by women, we gain even more insight from the many stones raised in memory of women. These inscriptions often shower them with praise that reveals the qualities valued in a Viking Age woman. They are frequently called mistress or housewife, but these terms carried a weight far beyond simple domesticity. They implied management, responsibility, and skill. A stone from Denmark praises a woman named Thorgunna as being the most skillful woman in Helgoland. Another, from Gotland, commemorates a woman named Tola, describing her as the best landowner. This term, landowner, is crucial. It indicates that women could not only inherit land but could manage estates, oversee production, and command the labor of others. They were economic players in their own right. Perhaps the most famous of all runestones dedicated to a woman is the one raised by King Harald Bluetooth for his mother, Thyra at Jelling. We already discussed Harald's larger stone, but the smaller one, raised by his father Gorm, is just as revealing. Gorm calls Thyra Denmark's adornment, or Denmark's strength. This is not the language used for a secluded, powerless figure. It suggests a woman of immense political importance, a partner in rulership whose wisdom and lineage were vital to the legitimacy and stability of the kingdom. The fact that both her husband and her son felt compelled to immortalize her in this way speaks volumes about her influence. These commemorations show that women were honored not just for their roles within the home, but for their contributions to the wealth, stability, and very identity of their families and communities. They were remembered as capable leaders, savvy businesswomen, and the respected matriarchs who held society together while the men were away on their distant voyages. Through these carved tributes, we hear a much richer, more complex story of Viking society, one where women wielded significant influence, managed wealth, and carved their own indelible mark into the stone record of history. While the runes themselves carry the explicit message, to truly understand the full impact of a runestone, we must also learn to read its visual language, the breathtaking artistic style that transforms a block of stone into a masterpiece of narrative art. These carvings are far from mere decoration. They are a parallel text, a story told in swirls, beasts, and interlace that communicates wealth, power, and cultural identity just as powerfully as the words they frame. The Vikings were not just writers. They were consummate artists, and their evolving styles provide a fascinating timeline of changing tastes and external influences. To categorize this artistic journey, scholars have identified several distinct styles, named after key archaeological sites where their defining examples were found, and they chart a clear evolution from bold, robust forms to the most elegant and intricate designs of the Viking Age. The journey often begins with styles like Mammon and Ringerike, which emerged in the 10th and early 11th centuries. The Mammon style, named after an axe found in a grave in Mammon, Denmark, is characterized by its compact, robust animals, often filled with intricate, pelleting patterns. The creatures are powerful and substantial, their bodies often forming tight, looping spirals. This style then gracefully evolves into the Ringerike style, which takes its name from the region in Norway where a distinctive red sandstone was used for carvings. Ringerike art brings a new sense of fluidity and elongation to the animal forms. The bodies become more sinuous, the patterns more plant-like, with tendrils and leafy vines beginning to intertwine with the beasts. This shift likely reflects growing contact with and influence from European art styles, particularly those from the British Isles and the continent, where similar vine scroll motifs were prevalent in illuminated manuscripts. A rune stone in the Ringerike style wasn't just a memorial. It was a sophisticated statement, showing that its sponsor was in tune with the wider artistic currents of the age. This artistic evolution culminates in the final, and perhaps most famous, of the Viking art styles, the urn style. Named after the stunningly carved wooden church in Urns, Norway, this style represents the absolute peak of Viking Age elegance and refinement. Imagine an art form composed entirely of sleek, ribbon-like animals, their bodies elongated into incredibly slender, elastic bands that loop and intertwine in a complex, rhythmic dance. The creatures of the urn style are often identified as graceful deer, horses, or serpentine hounds, and they are locked in a perpetual, elegant struggle, sometimes biting their own bodies or the limbs of other animals. The overall effect is one of breathtaking balance and controlled energy. It is a style that speaks of a mature, confident society, one that had moved beyond the raw power of earlier art and now valued sophistication, intricate craftsmanship, and a deeply spiritual sense of harmony. When you see a runestone carved in the urn style, you are looking at the pinnacle of Viking artistic achievement, a testament to a carver who was a master of both his mallet and chisel and his sense of sublime composition. One of the most important artistic elements on any runestone, present across many of these styles, is the rune serpent. This is not merely a border. It is the vital framework that gives the entire monument its shape and dynamism. The rune serpent is exactly what it sounds like, a long, snake-like or dragon-like beast, whose sinuous body is cleverly shaped to form the bands that contain the runic inscription. The runes are carved directly along the length of the creature's body, making the text and the art inseparable. The head and tail of the serpent are often prominently carved, sometimes biting the body's own tail to form a closed loop, a symbol of eternity, or facing off against another beast. The choice of serpent was deeply symbolic. In Norse mythology, the serpent Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, was a creature of immense power, encircling the world. By shaping the frame of their monument as this potent creature, the sponsors and carvers were invoking themes of protection, cosmic order, and raw, untamable power, wrapping their personal message in the coils of a legendary beast. The artistic quality of this rune serpent and the overall carving was a direct and unambiguous reflection of the sponsor's wealth and social standing. Commissioning a runestone was always a significant expense, but the level of artistry involved turned that expense into a public spectacle. A simple, crudely carved stone with a basic rune band communicated a basic message of remembrance. But a stone covered in a complex, deeply carved urn-style interlace, with multiple elegant beasts and a masterfully executed rune serpent, was a monumental flex. It shouted to every passerby that the sponsor had the resources to hire the most sought-after rune master in the region, a craftsman whose skill was so refined that he could make granite flow like ribbon. It declared that the family had the taste to appreciate the latest and most sophisticated artistic trends. In a society where visual display was integral to status, the runestone was a billboard for prestige. The art connected the message to the identity of the person who paid for it, ensuring that their wealth, power, and cultural sophistication were remembered for just as long as the name of the person they were honoring. The stone's beauty was its own form of immortality, a permanent claim to honor and high social rank, carved as indelibly as the runes themselves. But who were the hands that shaped these monuments? Behind every inscription, every elegant rune serpent, and every intricate interlace pattern stood a master artisan, a figure known to us today as the rune master. These were not simple laborers with a hammer and chisel. They were the architects of memory, highly skilled professionals who combined the roles of designer, calligrapher, and sculptor. They translated the wishes of grieving families and boasting chieftains into a permanent language of stone, and through their distinctive styles and occasional signatures, we can now identify them as individuals, pulling back the curtain on the creative genius behind the Viking Age's most enduring records. One of the most powerful ways we identify these individuals is through their unique artistic handwriting. Just as a modern art historian can distinguish a painting by Rembrandt from one by Van Gogh, runologists can recognize the work of a specific rune master by analyzing the subtle nuances of their craft. They examine the exact shape and proportions of each rune, the depth and angle of the carved lines, and the specific decorative motifs that recur across different stones. For instance, one carver might always give his rune for a distinctive, elongated crossbar, while another might favor a particular way of carving the serpent's eye or tail. These are the unconscious signatures of a practiced hand, a personal style so consistent that it allows us to group stones together and attribute them to a single known artist, even if they never wrote their own name. Beyond these stylistic clues, some rune masters were confident enough to literally sign their work. In the vibrant runestone hub of Uppland, Sweden, we meet two such celebrities of the 11th century, the masters Öpir and Fot. Öpir was a prolific artist, credited with carving or influencing the style of over 80 stones. His work is instantly recognizable for its elegant, spacious layout and the distinctive, slender runes he favored. He often worked in the sophisticated urn style, his rune serpents flowing with a graceful, rhythmic energy. Fot, perhaps a contemporary or a rival, left his own distinctive mark. His signature style often includes beautifully balanced compositions and a particular flair for the rune serpent's head, which he rendered with a powerful, almost lifelike vitality. That these men felt compelled to add their names phrases like Öpir carved these runes tells us they were not anonymous craftsmen. They were artists with reputations, whose name added value and prestige to the monument itself. The very existence of such famous carvers raises a fascinating question about their place in society. Were they itinerant wanderers, traveling from farm to farm in search of work? Or were they settled, respected members of their communities? The evidence suggests a mix of both. The distribution of stones by a single master like Öpir, clustered in central Uppland, but also appearing in outlying areas, implies he likely had a base of operations, perhaps in a growing trading town, from which he would travel to fulfill commissions from powerful local families. This was specialized, demanding work. A rune master needed to be literate, a rare skill in itself, and possess the physical strength and artistic vision to transform a rough block of granite into a polished narrative. They were undoubtedly well compensated, their fees reflecting their elite status as keepers of a powerful and prestigious technology. This leads to the deeper, more mystical dimension of their role. In a society where the runes were believed to hold inherent power, gifted to humanity by the god Odin himself, the rune master was more than a carver. He was an operator of a sacred technology. The ability to correctly arrange and carve these potent symbols was to tap into a fundamental force of the cosmos. This connects back to the magical formulas and curses we explored earlier. When a family wanted a protective charm carved into their memorial or a dire threat leveled against grave robbers, they weren't just buying a service. They were enlisting the specialized knowledge of someone who understood how to properly channel that power. The rune master was the technician who could ensure the spell was correctly formatted and activated, his mallet and chisel acting as the tools of both art and magic. This fusion of craftsman and mystic granted them a unique and likely revered position, standing at the crossroads of memory, status, and the divine, their hands shaping not only stone but the very legacy of the Viking world. Yet for all their permanence and deliberate placement, the story of the runestones did not end with the close of the Viking Age. As centuries turned and societies transformed, the meanings carved into these granite slabs faded from memory. The powerful declarations, the heartfelt prayers, the intricate art, all were slowly forgotten, and the great stones themselves began to vanish from the landscape, not through destruction, but through the quiet, mundane process of being repurposed. They became anonymous stone, their runes facing the earth or hidden within walls, their stories silenced for hundreds of years. The modern recovery of these monuments is a thrilling archaeological drama in its own right, a tale of sharp-eyed discoveries and incredible luck that has given these ancient voices a second chance to be heard. The most common fate for a lost runestone was to become simple building material. In a world where quarrying and shaping large stones was difficult labor, a conveniently shaped slab was a valuable resource. Countless runestones were pulled from their original sites and unceremoniously incorporated into new structures. They became foundations for churches and bridges, their carved surfaces buried deep in the mortar. They were flipped over and used as hearthstones in farmhouse fireplaces, the constant heat of centuries blackening and cracking the runes. They were laid flat as doorsteps, worn smooth by generations of footsteps. In each case, the stone continued to serve a practical function, but its true identity and profound purpose were completely erased. It was only when these structures were repaired, renovated, or torn down that the hidden messages were sometimes revealed, often to the complete astonishment of the workers involved. One of the most dramatic rediscoveries occurred in the 19th century at Nåsunda Church in Sweden. During a routine church renovation, workers were dismantling a section of the old stone floor when they turned over one of the large, flat paving stones. To their amazement, the underside was covered in deeply carved runes. The stone had been lying there for centuries, its inscription facing the earth, hidden just inches below the feet of countless churchgoers. This was the famous Jarlabank runestone, the very one where the powerful chieftain boasted. Jarlabank alone owned all of Täby. For generations, his bold declaration of ownership had been literally trodden underfoot, a secret history lying in plain sight. Its recovery was a powerful reminder that the past is often buried in the most ordinary of places. Similar stories of chance discovery are repeated across Scandinavia. A farmer plowing his field might feel his plowshare strike a large, buried stone. Curiosity piqued, he would dig it out and find a runic inscription, bringing a monument to light that had likely lain where it fell for nearly a millennium. Road construction in the 20th and 21st centuries has also been a major source of new finds. As crews cut new paths through the countryside, their machinery has frequently unearthed runestones that were long ago toppled and overgrown. Each of these discoveries sends a ripple of excitement through the archaeological community, as a piece of the grand puzzle is suddenly and unexpectedly returned to the board. The moment of finding, however, is only the beginning of a long and meticulous process. Once a runestone is identified, the delicate work of conservation and restoration begins. The first step is always careful documentation. Archaeologists and runologists create detailed rubbings, take high-resolution photographs, and now, increasingly, use three-dimensional laser scanning to create a perfect digital record of the stone and its inscription in its found state. This is crucial as it preserves the exact condition of the runes before any intervention. The stone itself is then gently cleaned by experts, who use soft brushes and specialized tools to remove centuries of dirt, moss, and biological growth without damaging the fragile carved surfaces. This cleaning alone can reveal previously hidden details, clarifying worn runes and bringing the artistry of the carver back into view. After documentation and cleaning comes the complex decision of what to do with the stone. Should it be moved to the safety of a museum, or should it be re-erected in its original location? There is no single answer, as each case is unique. Stones found in vulnerable locations, such as urban areas or active farmland, are often carefully transported to a museum where they can be preserved under controlled conditions and displayed for the public. The Swedish History Museum in Stockholm and the Miklagard Museum near Aarhus, for example, house magnificent collections of runestones, protecting them from the elements and allowing millions of visitors to experience them up close. This centralization also lets scholars study stones from different regions side by side, making comparisons that can reveal connections between different rune masters and artistic styles. For many other stones, however, the goal is to return them to the landscape. The philosophy of in situ preservation, keeping an artifact in its original place, is powerfully compelling for runestones. These monuments were never meant to be indoor exhibits. Their power is intrinsically tied to their location. They were placed on ancestral land, along important roads, and at assembly sites for a reason. To put them back on their original site, or as close to it as can be determined, is to restore a vital part of their meaning. This process is a feat of modern engineering. A new, stable foundation is often poured to prevent future sinking or tilting. The stone is then carefully lifted by crane and set securely in place, sometimes with the aid of a stainless steel support frame hidden within the stone or below ground. The sight of a freshly re-erected runestone standing once more against the Scandinavian sky is profoundly moving. It reconnects the monument to its physical and historical context, allowing it to function again as a landmark and a memorial, a sentinel from the past that has, against all odds, resumed its watch. But for all the genuine historical treasures we've uncovered, the world of runestones also has a shadowy side, one filled with tantalizing mysteries that turn out to be clever hoaxes. The powerful allure of these ancient stones, combined with the romantic image of the Vikings as intrepid explorers, has proven to be an irresistible temptation for forgers throughout history. This isn't just a minor footnote in runology. It's a critical part of the story because it shows us how the rigorous methods of modern science are applied to separate authentic history from wishful thinking. Perhaps no alleged runestone has captured the public imagination or sparked more intense debate than the Kensington runestone, discovered in Minnesota in the late 19th century. The story goes that a Swedish immigrant farmer named Olof Erman was clearing trees on his land when he unearthed a flat, 200-pound slab of greywacke stone tangled in the roots of a poplar tree. Carved on its face was a lengthy inscription in runes that told a staggering tale. It purported to be a record left by a group of Norse explorers in the year 1362. A full 130 years after the end of the Viking Age. The inscription described a party of 30 Goths and Norwegians on a journey from Vinland who ended up stranded, with 10 men red with blood and dead. It was a sensational claim, suggesting that Scandinavians had penetrated deep into the American Midwest, far beyond the known settlement at Elance Ox Meadows in Newfoundland. The immediate impact was explosive. For many Scandinavian immigrants in the region, the stone became a powerful source of pride, a tangible link proving their ancestors had reached the heart of the continent centuries before Columbus. It seemed to validate local legends and offered a dramatic new chapter in the story of European discovery. However, from the moment it was presented to scholars, the Kensington runestone was met with deep skepticism.
The problems with the inscription were numerous and profound. First and foremost was the language. The runes used were a bizarre mixture, primarily from the 16-character Younger Futhark of the Viking Age, but it also included runes from the older, 24-character Elder Futhark, which had fallen out of use centuries before the claimed date. Even more damning was the language itself. The text was not Old Norse, but rather a modern Swedish dialect peppered with English words, written in a style that resembled 19th century Swedish. The very phrase, "red with blood," was a modern Swedish idiom, completely alien to medieval Norse. The dating was also a major issue. The year 1362 was written in a decimal system that was not used in Scandinavia at that time. Furthermore, the geological evidence raised serious questions. The stone showed very little weathering for something supposedly exposed to the elements for over 500 years, and the tree that had supposedly grown over it was estimated to be only about 40 years old, not centuries. Despite these overwhelming academic arguments against its authenticity, the Kensington runestone has retained a passionate following, a testament to how deeply we want certain stories about the past to be true. The Kensington stone is just one of many such forgeries. Another famous example is the Spirit Pond runestones, found in Maine in 1971. These stones, discovered by a man walking along the shore, featured a map and inscriptions that also claimed a Norse presence. Yet again, the runic forms were anachronistic, and the language was a modern construct. These hoaxes often follow a similar pattern. They are typically single, isolated finds with no supporting archaeological evidence, such as settlements, tools, or other artifacts that would logically accompany a group of explorers. They emerge in areas with strong Scandinavian immigrant communities, where there is both a cultural desire for such a connection and a lack of local expertise in ancient Norse languages to immediately spot the errors. Forgers often make the mistake of creating a text that is too legible and too narrative. Unlike the often formulaic and context-dependent genuine runestones, they try to tell a spectacular story, whereas most real runestones are concerned with the mundane but vital matters of inheritance, memorial, and local prestige. So how do experts definitively separate the real from the fake? It is a multidisciplinary effort, a forensic investigation that combines linguistics, history, and hard science. The first line of defense is always a philological analysis, a deep dive into the language and the runes themselves. Specialists examine the rune forms against a dated chronology of known runestones. They ask, are these runes consistent with the time period they claim to be from? Is the grammar and vocabulary correct for Old Norse? Or does it contain words and phrases from modern Scandinavian languages? Is the composition style consistent with other memorials? Anachronisms in language are often the most immediate and undeniable red flag. For instance, a rune that was not invented until the 15th century simply cannot appear on a stone claiming to be from the 10th. When the language passes initial scrutiny, the investigation turns to the stone itself. Geologists can analyze the mineral composition of the rock and the patina that forms on its surface over centuries. A genuine runestone that has been exposed to the elements will develop a hard, dark layer of mineralization called desert varnish, or a specific type of lichen growth that is very difficult to artificially replicate. A forger might try to age a stone with acid or by burying it, but these methods leave telltale signs that can be detected under microscopic analysis. Scientists can also examine the weathering within the carved runes themselves. On a genuinely ancient stone, the carved grooves will have weathered at the same rate as the rest of the rock surface, creating a smooth, uniform wear. A modern carving, even if artificially aged, will often show sharper, fresher edges within the runes or different weathering patterns that betray its recent origin. In some cases, tools like scanning electron microscopes can even identify minuscule traces of modern metal from the chisels used to carve the fake inscription. This rigorous process of authentication is what makes runology a true science, not a matter of speculation. It protects the integrity of the genuine historical record and ensures that the incredible true stories of the Vikings are not diluted by appealing fictions. The next time you hear about a mysterious stone with strange carvings found in an unexpected place, remember the lessons of the Kensington runestone. The truth of the Viking Age is already astounding enough, written in thousands of authentic monuments across Scandinavia. And it is through careful, skeptical science that we continue to listen to their real stories. So far, we've journeyed through epic voyages, poetic eulogies, and declarations of faith and power. But if we truly want to hear the heartbeat of the Viking Age, we must listen for its quieter rhythms, the sounds of daily life that are so often lost to history. This is where some of the most valuable runestones come into play. While they may lack the dramatic flair of the Rurk or the royal bombast of gelling, their inscriptions offer us something just as precious, a window into the ordinary world of farmers, neighbors, and law-abiding citizens. These stones shift our focus from the deck of the longship to the field, the forge, and the local assembly, giving voice to the common people who built the society that the warriors and explorers ventured out from. Perhaps the most common civic duty immortalized in stone was the construction and maintenance of bridges and roads. Across Scandinavia, you find inscriptions with the simple, powerful phrase, "He made the bridge." At first glance, this might seem like a minor public service, but in the context of the Viking Age, it was an act of immense social and economic importance. A reliable bridge over a rushing river or a causeway across a swampy meadow didn't just make travel easier. It connected communities, enabled trade, and solidified a region's status as organized and prosperous. Building one was a massive undertaking, requiring the coordination of labor, resources, and engineering skill. When a local chieftain or a wealthy landowner financed such a project, they were demonstrating their commitment to their community and, of course, ensuring their own name would be associated with this vital piece of infrastructure for generations. The runestone was the equivalent of a permanent dedication plaque, ensuring that every traveler who benefited from the new bridge would also know the generosity and capability of the person who built it. It was public relations and civic duty carved into a single, enduring monument. These stones also functioned as the period's most robust legal documents. In a society without centralized bureaucracy or paper records, a runestone was the ultimate way to make a contract or a claim permanent and public. We see this clearly in inscriptions that deal with the most fundamental aspect of life, land ownership. A stone from Uppland, Sweden, states plainly, "Björn and Grimmer had this stone raised and made this village after themselves, and owned this estate." This is more than a memorial. It's a land deed set in granite. It establishes inheritance, clarifies lineage, and warns off any potential claimants who might dispute their right to the property. The stone itself, placed prominently on the land, was the physical proof of their ownership. It was a legal assertion that everyone in the community could see and that, thanks to its permanence, would outlive the original owners and guide the inheritance for their children. Sometimes, these legal inscriptions get even more specific, recording the resolution of disputes in a way that feels remarkably modern. Consider the story preserved on the Glavendrup stone in Denmark. This large monument was raised by a woman named Ragnhild in memory of her husband, Ole, but the inscription goes far beyond a simple expression of grief. It contains a stern warning stating, "But a man who does damage to this stone or drags it away to stand in memory of another, he shall be an oath-breaker and a villain." This clause is a fascinating legal instrument. It's not just a generic curse, it's a specific prohibition against repurposing the stone, which was likely a known problem. By declaring such an act would make someone an oathbreaker, Ragnhild was invoking the most serious social and legal condemnation in Norse society. She was using the runestone to actively defend her husband's legacy and her own right to memorialize him as she saw fit. It transforms the stone from a passive object into an active participant in the local legal framework, a permanent enforcer of a family's rights. Beyond law and infrastructure, runestones provide us with a priceless directory of Viking Age professions, moving us beyond the stereotypical image of the raider. Yes, we find many stones for seafarers and warriors, but we also find touching memorials for the blacksmith, the farmer, and the homemaker. A stone from Västergötland commemorates a man named Hera, who is praised specifically as a very good farmer. In an agricultural society, this was high praise indeed, recognizing the skill, diligence, and prosperity he brought to his land and his community. Another stone honors a peaceful seafarer, a poignant reminder that many of those who sailed were merchants and traders, not warriors, their voyages driven by commerce rather than conquest. One of the most touching examples comes from a stone that remembers a woman not as a warrior's wife, but for her own domestic skill, calling her the most skillful in the estate. This term recognized her mastery in managing the complex economy of a large household, from food production to textile work, a role that was absolutely essential to the family's wealth and status. What makes these everyday inscriptions so incredibly valuable is their democratizing power. The grand stories of kings like Harald Bluetooth and the epic poems for chieftains like Sibby naturally focus on the elite. But the stones for the good farmer, the bridge builder, and the skillful housewife pull back the curtain on the other 99% of the population. They show us the social and economic engine that powered the Viking world. They reveal a society deeply concerned with law, order, and community welfare, where your reputation as an honest farmer or a generous builder was as worthy of permanent record as a successful raid in the East. These stones remind us that for every celebrated warrior who sailed to Constantinople, there were hundreds of skilled, hardworking people back home who kept the farms running, maintained the roads, upheld the law, and wove the very fabric of a society capable of such astonishing exploits. They are the quiet, sturdy foundation upon which the entire dramatic saga of the Viking Age was built. The profound legacy of these ancient stones, however, did not remain locked in the quiet churchyards and farmlands of Scandinavia. As the modern era dawned, the runestones were rediscovered not just by archaeologists, but by poets, politicians, and artists who saw in their angular carvings a powerful new meaning. They were plucked from their historical context and reborn as potent symbols of national identity during the great wave of Romantic nationalism that swept across Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries. In nations like Sweden and Denmark, which were forging their modern identities, the runestones offered a tangible, heroic, and distinctly non-classical past. They were evidence of a glorious indigenous culture that predated kings and foreign influence, a time of bold explorers and independent farmers. The gelling stones, in particular, were transformed from a royal monument into the very bedrock of Danish nationhood, their declaration of a unified Christian Denmark resonating powerfully with the people seeking to define themselves. This nationalist adoption was a double-edged sword. It ensured the stones were protected, studied, and celebrated as national treasures, but it also often simplified their complex messages, polishing away the nuances of grief, legal disputes, and everyday life to present a streamlined narrative of ancestral glory and martial prowess tailored to the needs of a burgeoning modern state. This repackaging of the Viking past did not stop at national borders. In the latter half of the 20th century, the aesthetic and symbolic power of the runes exploded into global popular culture, finding a particularly resonant home within the subculture of heavy metal music. Bands, especially in the genres of black metal and Viking metal, voraciously adopted runic alphabets and styles derived from runestone art. They used them to create logos and album artwork that instantly communicated themes of pagan heritage, epic struggle, and a rejection of contemporary mainstream values. The band Bathory, a pioneer of the genre, used runic-style lettering, while countless others, like Enslaved and Ammon Amarth, weave runic symbols and themes from Norse mythology directly into their visual and lyrical identity. This adoption is more than mere decoration. It's a form of cultural claim staking. The runes, for these artists and their fans, represent an authentic, pre-Christian, and fiercely independent worldview, their angular, unforgiving forms mirroring the music's own raw power and intensity. This has created a fascinating feedback loop, where the academic rediscovery of the Viking Age fuels artistic expression, which in turn introduces millions of people worldwide to these ancient symbols, albeit often through a lens of romanticized rebellion and dark heroism. The reach of this modern runic revival extends far beyond the mosh pit, thoroughly saturating our mainstream entertainment landscape. Blockbuster movies from the Vikings in the 1950s to Thor, Ragnarok in the 21st century feature runes as set dressing and plot devices. The wildly popular television series Vikings meticulously incorporates runic inscriptions on weapons, jewelry, and, of course, stones, using them to add a layer of historical authenticity and to signify moments of profound destiny or magic. The video game industry has become one of the most significant conduits for runic exposure. Games like Assassin's Creed, Valhalla and God of War 2018, and its sequel allow players to explore vast, digitally recreated Viking worlds where runestones are collectible items, mystical puzzles, and key elements of world building. In these interactive spaces, players don't just see runes, they engage with them, deciphering their clues to unlock power-ups or piece together fragments of the game's lore, creating a personal, hands-on connection with this ancient form of communication. This massive cultural absorption, while fantastic for visibility, inevitably comes with a significant trade-off: the simplification and, at times, outright distortion of the runestone's original purpose and meaning. In popular culture, runes are almost universally depicted as instruments of magic, prophecy, or supernatural power. A character carves a rune and a weapon is enchanted, a door is sealed by magic, or a fate is foretold. While this draws on a genuine, albeit complex, aspect of the runic tradition, the belief in their inherent power, it overwhelmingly overshadows their primary, mundane functions. The vast majority of runestones were memorials, legal documents, and statements of social status. They were about securing a family's inheritance, not summoning a demon. They recorded the death of a beloved son on a trading voyage, not the incantation to unleash a dragon. This pop culture lens flattens the rich tapestry of Viking society, reducing a diverse and practical writing system to a monolithic, esoteric code for wizardry. It risks creating a modern mythology that obscures the truly fascinating historical reality of these people as sophisticated farmers, traders, lawmakers, and poets. Yet, despite these simplifications, the enduring presence of runestones in our global consciousness is an undeniable good. It ensures their survival not as dusty museum relics, but as vibrant, living elements of our shared cultural imagination. The little boy who learns the Futhark alphabet from a video game, or the music fan who becomes curious about the history behind a band's logo, is being drawn into a conversation with the past. This popular engagement creates a broad foundation of interest that supports academic research, museum funding, and conservation efforts. It keeps the stories alive, allowing for a continuous reinterpretation of what these stones mean to us today. The runestones have proven to be remarkably adaptable. They have been silent mourners on a hillside, royal proclamations of divine right, nationalist symbols of unity, and now, icons of counterculture and epic fantasy. Their journey through time demonstrates that the meaning of a historical artifact is never truly fixed. It evolves with each new generation that discovers it, finds relevance in its forms, and projects its own dreams and identities onto its weathered surface. They remain, as they were always intended to be, a permanent conversation between the past and the present. But this incredible legacy, these thousands of voices carved in stone, did not speak to the world continuously. For centuries after the Viking Age ended, the runestones fell into a deep silence. Their meanings were forgotten, their language became a mystery, and many of the monuments themselves were swallowed by the earth, repurposed as building blocks, or simply regarded as the strange, ancient work of giants or trolls by local folklore. The Great Reawakening, the moment when these stones began to whisper their secrets once more, arrived with the tumultuous and transformative 19th century. This was not a gradual rediscovery, but a true runestone renaissance, a cultural explosion driven by a powerful convergence of new intellectual currents: romanticism, nationalism, and the birth of scientific archaeology. It was in this fertile ground that the runestones were reborn, not as pagan curiosities, but as the sacred scripture of the emerging Scandinavian nations. The driving force behind this revival was the powerful wave of romantic nationalism that swept across Europe. In the wake of the Napoleonic Wars and amid the rise of modern nation-states, countries like Sweden and Denmark were fiercely looking inward to define their unique identities. They needed a heroic past, a foundational epic that was distinctly their own, separate from the classical Greco-Roman tradition that had long dominated European high culture. The Viking Age, with its sagas of exploration, independence, and bold individualism, provided the perfect origin story, and the runestones were its ultimate physical evidence. These were not manuscripts copied by foreign monks. They were raw, indigenous monuments, carved by the ancestors themselves and scattered across the native soil. They offered an unbroken link to a perceived golden age of freedom and power. Politicians, poets, and scholars began to see the runestones as national treasures, the literal building blocks of a new cultural identity. Preserving them became a patriotic duty, a way to reclaim a glorious heritage and inspire national pride in the present. Fueling this nationalist fervor was the artistic and intellectual spirit of Romanticism. Romantics championed emotion, mystery, and a deep reverence for the ancient and the sublime. They were fascinated by the folk soul of a people, and they saw in their rugged, weathered runestones a profound connection to the northern landscape and its primal spirit. The angular, cryptic runes appealed to their romantic love of the enigmatic and the symbolic. Poets like Esaias Tegnér in Sweden wove runic themes into their work, celebrating the stones as mystical relics of a bygone heroic era. This romantic lens sometimes idealized the Vikings, polishing away the complexities of their society to present them as noble, freedom-loving ancestors. But this idealization was crucial. It generated the public enthusiasm and financial support needed to launch the first large-scale, systematic efforts to find and document the stones. The runestones were no longer just rocks. They were romantic icons, symbols of a wild, poetic, and authentically northern past. Turning this romantic enthusiasm into rigorous science required a new kind of scholar, individuals who combined the passion of a nationalist with the meticulous eye of a detective. The father of modern runology is widely considered to be the Danish philologist Lars Worm, or as he is more commonly known, Ole Worm. Working in the 17th century, he was a precursor, but the 19th century produced its own giants. In Sweden, the monumental figure was Johann Gustaf Liljegren. A man of relentless energy, Liljegren served as the national antiquarian of Sweden and made it his life's mission to track down and record every runestone in the kingdom. He traveled the countryside on arduous journeys, often on foot or by horse, interviewing farmers, inspecting church walls, and excavating stones that had been lost for centuries. His greatest legacy was the publication of Runarkunder, or runic documents, a systematic catalog that aimed to present accurate drawings and transcriptions of the inscriptions. This work laid the essential foundation for all future runic study, transforming the field from a collection of scattered notes into an organized scientific discipline. Alongside Liljegren, other key figures emerged. In Denmark, Carl Christian Raffin was a pivotal force, co-founding the Royal Society of Northern Antiquaries and tirelessly promoting the study of Old Norse language and history. His work helped to connect the runic inscriptions of Scandinavia with the Viking voyages described in the Icelandic sagas, creating a grand, interconnected narrative of the Norse world. These pioneers faced immense challenges. The runes were often worn smooth by weather or damaged by reuse. Local dialects and evolving language meant that interpreting the Old Norse was a constant puzzle. They had to develop standards for accurately drawing the runes, a critical task since a single misplaced line could change the entire meaning of a word. Their work was a painstaking process of comparison, deduction, and collaboration, slowly building a dictionary and a grammar for a language that had not been spoken for hundreds of years. This scholarly zeal translated into dramatic action on the ground. The 19th century became the great age of runestone recovery. Guided by the research of Liljegren and others, teams fanned out across the Scandinavian landscape. They carefully excavated stones that had been buried for centuries, turning them over to reveal the hidden inscriptions on their undersides. They negotiated with farmers and church officials to free stones that had been built into walls and floors. And then came one of the most visible and symbolic acts of the entire Renaissance, the re-erection of the monuments. Stones that had lain flat in fields or were hidden in foundations were carefully lifted and set upright on new, stable bases, often in their original or believed original locations. This was a profoundly symbolic gesture. It was an act of resurrection, giving the stones back their voices and their intended dignity, They were no longer anonymous rubble. They were once again proud memorials, standing sentinel in the landscape as their creators had intended. Public runic parks were established, and the stones became points of civic pride, attracting visitors and solidifying their status as national monuments. The impact of this 19th century Renaissance cannot be overstated. It was the essential pivot point that turned local folklore into an international science. The comprehensive catalogs created by Liljegren and his contemporaries provided the raw data, the corpus of inscriptions that all future runologists would rely upon. The standards they established for documentation, transcription, and interpretation became the bedrock of the discipline. They successfully separated genuine historical study from fanciful speculation and outright forgery, applying a new level of philological and historical rigor. This period transformed the runestones from obscure local curiosities into cherished national symbols, and, most importantly, established the fundamental framework of modern runology. It was this century of passionate, patriotic, and increasingly scientific effort that unlocked the runic code, allowing the true, complex, and human stories of the Viking Age to begin their long journey back into light, setting the stage for the even more astonishing discoveries that modern technology would bring. This remarkable journey from romantic rediscovery to scientific cataloging has now entered an entirely new era, propelled by a technological revolution that is letting us see these ancient stones in ways Ole Worm or Johan Liljegren could never have imagined. The traditional tools of the runologist, a keen eye, a measuring tape, and a camera have been joined by a stunning array of digital instruments that are not just assisting research, but fundamentally rewriting it. We are no longer simply looking at the runestones. We are peering into them, peeling back the layers of time, and weathering to recover lost information and settle debates that have lingered for over a century. At the forefront of this revolution is a technique that creates a perfect, manipulable digital twin of the monument, three-dimensional laser scanning. Imagine pointing a laser at a runestone and capturing millions of individual data points, each one recording a precise measurement of the stone's surface topography. When processed by a computer, these points coalesce into an incredibly detailed three-dimensional model. This digital replica can be rotated, zoomed, and analyzed from any angle on a screen. But the true power lies in what we can do with the lighting. Researchers can digitally position a virtual light source to cast raking light across the surface from any direction. By doing this, they can highlight the subtlest variations in the stone that are completely invisible to the naked eye under normal, flat lighting conditions. This allows them to see the exact depth and angle of every single chisel stroke, revealing the specific techniques and tools used by the rune master. It can show where a carver corrected a mistake, or where a preliminary sketch was lightly incised before the final, deep carving began. This level of detail is helping to definitively identify the individual handwriting of different carvers, mapping their movements across Scandinavia with a confidence never before possible. Working in concert with laser scanning is another photographic marvel known as reflectance transformation imaging, or RTI. This process is like giving a runestone its own personal photo shoot under dozens of different lighting conditions. A camera is fixed on a tripod, pointed directly at the inscription. Then, a movable light source is positioned to illuminate the stone from a series of many different angles from the top, the sides, and everywhere in between. A series of high-resolution photographs is taken, each one with the light hitting the carved surface from a distinct direction. Specialized software then combines all these photographs into a single, interactive digital file. When a researcher opens this file, they can use a virtual light source to dynamically move across the image. They can drag this light to graze the surface from the left, then from the right, and then from directly above. This interactive lighting dramatically enhances the contrast of the carved lines, making faint, weathered runes suddenly snap into sharp relief. RTI has been particularly transformative for stones that have been exposed to the elements for 1,000 years, where the runes have been worn down to near invisibility. On these monuments, the technique can reveal the ghost of a rune, the faintest shadow of a carving that was thought to be lost forever, allowing for a more complete and accurate reading of the entire inscription. These technologies are not just for show. They are actively resolving long-standing historical puzzles and making genuine new discoveries on stones that scholars have been studying for generations. A powerful example comes from the famous Rurk runestone. For over 100 years, runologists have debated the exact meaning and sequence of its labyrinthine text. Traditional examinations suggested a possible break in the carving, perhaps indicating the work of two different hands. When the Rurk stone was subjected to high-resolution three-dimensional scanning, the results were stunning. The scans confirmed subtle differences in the depth and style of the runes in certain sections, providing concrete physical evidence to support the theory of multiple carvers. This isn't just an academic detail. It suggests the inscription may have been carved in stages, perhaps reflecting a change in purpose or a shift in the political message it was meant to convey. In another case, on a badly weathered stone in Denmark, RTI was used to examine a section that was always considered blank and uninformative. As the virtual light swept across the surface, the faint but unmistakable shape of a bindrune, a fused combination of two runic letters, emerged from the stone. This single, newly discovered symbol added a layer of possible magical or personal significance to the monument that had been completely missed for centuries. These tools are proving that no runestone is ever truly finished being studied. There are always new secrets waiting for the right light to reveal them. The technological frontier is now pushing even further with the integration of artificial intelligence into the runologist's toolkit. Researchers are beginning to train machine learning algorithms on vast databases of runic inscriptions. The goal is to create an AI system that can act as an ultra-precise collaborator. This AI can be taught to recognize the most minute stylistic nuances, the specific curve of a serpent's tail, the unique angle of a rune's crossbar, the statistical frequency of certain decorative motifs. Once trained, it can scan through digital models of thousands of runestones and identify patterns and connections that would take a human researcher a lifetime to spot, if they could spot them at all. It could, for instance, identify with high probability that a stone in a remote part of Norway was carved by the same master who worked in the heart of Uppland, revealing previously unknown travel routes and cultural connections. It could also help to automatically reconstruct damaged sections of an inscription by comparing the fragmentary remains to the vast corpus of known, complete phrases and grammatical structures. This isn't about replacing the human expert. It's about augmenting their intuition and deep cultural knowledge with the brute force pattern recognition of a machine, opening up a new chapter of discovery where the stones themselves can help us piece together the full, magnificent story of the world that created them. But for every runestone we can read and understand, there remains a handful that stand in defiant silence. Their messages locked behind a cipher we have yet to crack. These enigmatic monuments are the ultimate cold cases of the Viking Age, reminding us that for all our advanced technology and centuries of scholarship, the Norse still hold some of their cards close to their chest. Beyond the complex but ultimately decipherable riddles of the Rurkstone, we find inscriptions that seem to defy logic itself. Strings of runes that form no known words, sequences that appear to be pure gibberish, or arrangements so strange they point towards a purpose far beyond simple communication. One of the most perplexing examples is the now lost stone of Stentofen, related to the one we discussed earlier. While part of its inscription is a clear curse, another section contains a sequence of runes that reads simply, H I Thorn UWING. This string has been the subject of intense debate for over a century. It doesn't form a recognizable Old Norse word. Some linguists have desperately tried to parse it as the horse of the friends, which makes little contextual sense. Others propose it's a powerful, condensed magical formula, a kind of runic incantation where the power lies not in the meaning of the words, but in the specific sequence and combination of the rune's inherent symbolic force. The sequence might be invoking a series of concepts wealth. The divine, a warrior fused together to create a supernatural effect that was perfectly understood by the carver and his community, but is completely lost on us today. It's a cryptographic puzzle with no key, a whisper from the past that we can hear but cannot comprehend. Then there are stones that challenge the very definition of writing, covered in symbols that bear no resemblance to any known runic alphabet. The Birketorp stone in Blekinge, Sweden, stands in a lonely field, part of a small collection of standing stones. Its inscription is a classic, chilling curse, warning of prophesying destruction for anyone who breaks it. But on its surface, among the legible runes, are deeply carved, unique symbols, a series of stacked triangles and strange, grid-like patterns. These are not bindrunes, which are elegant fusions of known letters. These are something else entirely. They look almost like schematic diagrams or proprietary sigils. One theory suggests they could be a form of land surveyor's marks, denoting boundaries or land measurements in a system we no longer understand. Another, more tantalizing idea is that they represent a form of pre-runic pictographic writing, a survival from a much older, forgotten system that was only used for specific, perhaps sacred, purposes. Alternatively, they could be the personal maker's mark of a specific rune carving school or a family's unique emblem of ownership, a code so local that its meaning died with the last person who needed to recognize it. These symbols are a stark visual reminder that our knowledge of Viking Age communication is based on the fragments that survived. There may have been entire symbolic languages, used for law, trade, or magic, that have simply vanished from the record, leaving behind only these tantalizing, untranslatable traces. This theme of the untranslatable reaches its peak with stones that seem to be deliberate exercises in obscurity. Consider the Sparlursa stone from Västergötland, Sweden. A large portion of its inscription is perfectly clear, describing a man's achievements and his participation in battles. But then, the text suddenly shifts. It presents a sequence of runes that are written in a bizarre mirror image fashion, or reversed left to right. Furthermore, it employs a system known as cipher runes, where the runes of the Younger Futhark are organized into groups, and then referenced by their position within that group. To read it, you would need to know the specific cipher key, turning the inscription into a complex code. Why would someone go to such extraordinary lengths on a public monument? It certainly wasn't to keep the message secret from illiterate people, as they couldn't read it anyway. This suggests the intended audience was a small, elite group, perhaps a warrior band, a religious cult, or a family with esoteric knowledge. The act of encoding the message may have been more important than the message itself. It was a display of intellectual superiority and a way to create a boundary between the initiated and the uninitiated. The stone broadcasts two messages simultaneously: a public boast for the common folk, and a hidden, coded narrative for those in the know, a narrative whose full content we can only guess at. The mystery deepens with stones that appear to be outright forgeries from the Viking Age itself. The Kingatorsuaq runestone was discovered in a remote, uninhabited area of Greenland in the 18th century. Its inscription is short, but profoundly strange. It seems to mention 3 names and a date that corresponds to the year 1333. The runic forms, however, are anachronistic, looking more like they belong to the 14th century than to the classic Viking Age, which had largely ended by then. The bigger problem is the location. It was found on a tiny, barren island off Greenland's west coast, a place with no fresh water or resources to support a settlement, far from the known Norse eastern and western settlements. Was it a genuine record left by Norse hunters blown off course? Or is it a later creation, perhaps by Inuit people who had contact with Norse settlers and learned some runes, carving it as a practice piece or a curiosity? The stone exists in a historical gray area, too odd to be easily accepted, yet just plausible enough to prevent its dismissal. It dangles the possibility of Norse exploration deeper into the Arctic than we ever thought, but without any corroborating evidence, it remains a ghost on the map, a question mark carved in stone. These unsolved stones are far more than historical footnotes. They are active, pulsating voids in our understanding, and they serve a vital function in the modern study of the Viking Age. They are the ultimate check against academic overconfidence, reminding every runologist that a definitive translation is often a temporary victory, and that the next stone uncovered could overturn everything. They keep the field alive and dynamic, preventing it from becoming a simple process of cataloging and filing away the past. The very existence of these enigmas is an open invitation. It calls out not just to tenured professors, but to amateur linguists, computer programmers, and history enthusiasts around the world. In an age of digital collaboration, high-resolution images of these inscriptions are available online, allowing anyone with a novel idea or a talent for pattern recognition to take a crack at solving them. The solution to the Stentoffen sequence or the Sparlersa cipher might not come from a university library, but from a software engineer in California or a puzzle enthusiast in Tokyo who sees a pattern everyone else missed. This democratization of mystery is a beautiful thing. It means that these stones, erected over 1,000 years ago to speak to a community, are now speaking to a global community, their secrets guarded not by distance or time, but by the brilliant, maddening complexity of the human mind that created them. They stand as a permanent testament to the fact that some stories are too powerful, too personal, or too sacred to be told plainly, and that the Vikings, for all their reputation for brute force, possessed a sophistication and a love for mystery that continues to captivate and confound us to this day. Amidst all the grand narratives of kings and global exploration, it is sometimes the smallest, most personal stories that resonate the deepest. To truly understand the runestone, we must see it not as a cold artifact, but as a vessel for a specific, beating human heart. For that, let's travel to the Vang Stone in Norway, a monument that stands as one of the most poignant and beautifully preserved expressions of love and loss from the entire Viking Age. Its inscription is not long, nor is it boastful of wealth or conquest. Instead, it speaks with a quiet, devastating clarity. It reads, Gunvor, Thrydrik's daughter, made the bridge in memory of her daughter Astrither. She was the most skillful girl in Hadeland. In just a few carved words, we are pulled directly into a family tragedy over 1,000 years old, introduced to a mother and daughter whose story would have otherwise been completely erased by time. Imagine the scene for a moment. A woman named Gunvor, her identity firmly anchored as Thrydrik's daughter, is now enduring the unimaginable grief of burying her own child, Astrither. The stone tells us she didn't just raise a stone, she made the bridge. This is a crucial detail. As we've learned, building a bridge was a significant act of civic duty and piety, a good work believed to aid the soul's journey into the afterlife. But here, the act feels intensely personal. Perhaps this bridge crossed a stream that Astrither played near, or a route the family traveled often. By physically constructing it, Gunvor was transforming her abstract grief into something tangible and useful for her community, a permanent, functional memorial that would literally carry people forward for generations, all in her daughter's name. Every traveler who crossed that bridge would benefit from Gunvor's love and remember the girl it honored. The inscription's final clause is what truly shatters the centuries of silence. The simple, powerful declaration that Astrither was the most skillful girl in Hadeland. Hadeland is the district, the local world she lived in. This is not a generic epithet. It is a specific, proud boast from a grieving mother. It tells us that Astrither was not just loved, she was accomplished. Her skill could have been in weaving, in managing a household, in a craft, or in farming. The stone doesn't specify, and in a way that makes it more universal. The phrase captures the potential of a young life, the promise and talent that her community recognized, and that was tragically cut short. This wasn't just a mother's biased opinion. It was a publicly acknowledged fact worthy of being carved in stone for all eternity. In this one line, we move beyond the statistics of medieval child mortality and meet a real individual, a girl known for her ability, deeply cherished, and profoundly missed. The Vang stone compels us to reconsider the very essence of what a runestone represents. Yes, they were legal documents and status symbols, but at their core, they are deeply human documents. They are about the universal experiences that transcend time and culture. The fierce, protective love of a parent, the wrenching pain of losing a child, and the desperate, human need to scream into the void that someone was here, that they mattered, and that they are remembered. Gunvor's story is not unique in the runic record. All across Scandinavia, we find similar echoes of profound personal loss. Stones raised by brothers for brothers who drowned at sea, by husbands for wives who managed their estates, by children for parents who guided them. These inscriptions are the raw, unfiltered emotional landscape of the Viking Age, proving that beneath the mail coats and behind the dragon-proud ships, these were people who loved, grieved, and sought to make their pain permanent, ensuring that a name like Astrither would never truly be forgotten, her skill echoing through the millennia. Yet for all the profound emotion and cultural power they carried, raising a runestone was first and foremost a monumental business decision, a significant capital investment that required substantial resources, specialized labor, and complex logistics. To fully appreciate the declaration a runestone made, we need to look past the carved message and consider the sheer physical and economic effort required to bring it into being. It began with the stone itself. These weren't just any rocks picked up from a field. They were carefully selected for their size, durability, and aesthetic quality. The most prized material was often a specific type of fine-grained granite or gneiss that could withstand centuries of weathering while providing a smooth, consistent surface for carving. Quarrying such a block was a massive undertaking in an era without power tools. The most common method was to locate a natural fissure in an outcrop of bedrock, and then use iron wedges and heavy hammers to painstakingly crack the stone along its grain. Teams of laborers would work the wedge points into the crack, slowly and rhythmically driving them deeper until a colossal slab, often weighing several tons, finally broke free. This was dangerous, back-breaking work that required immense skill to avoid shattering the stone into useless fragments. Once freed from the earth, the real logistical challenge began: transportation. Given their immense weight, moving a multi-ton block of stone over land for any significant distance was practically impossible. This geographical reality dictated the entire industry. Runestones are overwhelmingly found near waterways along fjords, rivers, and lakes because water transport was the only feasible method. The quarries themselves were often situated right on a coastline or a navigable river. We have archaeological evidence, including depictions on other runestones, of the types of vessels used. The iconic Viking longships, with their shallow drafts, were likely not the primary movers. They were built for speed and raiding, not bulk cargo. Instead, heavier, broader merchant nars, designed to carry tons of timber, furs, and other goods, were probably commissioned or adapted for this specific purpose. Imagine the scene: a raw stone block being carefully rolled on logs down to the shoreline, then leveraged onto a waiting vessel using ropes, rollers, and sheer manpower. The journey itself was precarious. A sudden storm could swamp a boat and send its priceless cargo to the bottom of a fjord. Upon reaching the destination, the entire process had to be reversed, with the stone unloaded and dragged to its final, prominent location, a site chosen for maximum visibility to the community. The single greatest expense, however, was not the stone or its transport, but the human expertise required to transform that raw block into a lasting legacy. The rune master was a highly paid professional, a combination of master stonemason, calligrapher, and designer. His was a rare and coveted skill set. First, he had to be literate, a rarity in itself, fluent in the complexities of the runic alphabet and the poetic formulas of memorial language. Second, he possessed the artistic vision to design the entire monument, laying out the inscription and any accompanying artwork like the rune serpent or Christian cross in a harmonious and powerful composition. Finally, he had the physical craft and strength to execute that vision with a hammer and a set of iron chisels, carving clean, precise lines into unyielding granite. This was not a job for an amateur. A single misplaced strike could ruin the stone, wasting the entire investment. The rune master's fee would have reflected this elite status. While we have no surviving price lists, we can make educated estimates by comparing the cost to other known major expenses of the era. Commissioning a runestone was likely comparable in cost to building a large, seagoing ship, one of the most significant investments a Viking Age individual could make. It was certainly far more expensive than constructing a typical longhouse or acquiring a herd of cattle. This was not an expense borne by common farmers, but by the elite, successful warriors returned from abroad with chests of silver, wealthy landowners, and powerful chieftains. This immense cost explains the striking geographical concentration of runestones, most notably in the Uppland region of Sweden. This area wasn't just randomly prosperous. It was the epicenter of a specific economic boom. The 11th century, when the majority of runestones were raised, followed the peak of the Viking expeditions. Vast quantities of silver, primarily from danegeld payments extorted from England, and trade wealth from the east, flooded into this region. This new liquid wealth created a class of nouveau-rich families who were eager to convert their silver into permanent social and political capital. Raising a runestone was the perfect way to do this. It was a public display of wealth that also served a critical legal function, securing land inheritance, and a pious function, offering prayers for the soul. In less wealthy or more remote parts of Scandinavia, where such surplus capital was uncommon, runestones are correspondingly rare. The distribution map of runestones, therefore, is not just a map of grief or piety. It is a direct map of economic power and social competition in the late Viking Age. Every stone standing sentinel in a field represents a successful financial venture, a family with the means to hire specialist labor and command community resources, ensuring that their name and their wealth were literally set in stone for all to see and for all time. So, from memorials etched in grief to boasts of foreign adventures and cryptic poems carved for eternity, we have journeyed together across the incredible world of the Viking Age runestone. It becomes undeniably clear that these monuments are so much more than simple rocks. They are a direct, unfiltered line directly into the thoughts, the fears, the ambitions, and the very soul of the people who shaped the North for centuries. Their meanings are profoundly layered, complex, and in some thrilling cases, still tantalizingly hidden, just waiting for the next technological breakthrough or brilliant insight to crack their code. We have seen how a single stone can be both a legal document securing a family's future and a raw, weeping wound of personal loss. We have traced the routes of global explorers from the heart of Sweden to the walls of Constantinople and the markets of the Middle East, all through brief, boastful lines carved close to home. We have witnessed the spiritual revolution of a continent, as invocations to Thor were slowly replaced by prayers to a new Christian god, all documented on the same enduring granite surfaces. These stones challenge the simplistic caricature of the mindless Viking raider, revealing instead a society of sophisticated poets, shrewd lawmakers, ambitious traders, and devoted family members, all of whom understood the power of the written word to shape their legacy. They are the ultimate historical paradox, both intensely personal and grandly public, brutally pragmatic and deeply mystical, firmly rooted in a local landscape while speaking of a world staggeringly vast for its time. Every time a new stone is discovered in a farmer's field or a digital scan reveals a faded rune, we are given another precious piece of this immense, continent-spanning puzzle. The conversation with the past is never truly over. It is an ongoing dialogue, and each new discovery invites us to listen a little more closely to these ancient voices. We would love to hear from you on this journey of discovery. What is the most fascinating runestone story or enduring mystery that captured your imagination? Was it the heartbreaking simplicity of Gunvar's love for her daughter Astrither, the cryptic, apocalyptic riddles of the Rurkstone, or the sheer audacity of Jarlabank's self-made memorial? Share your thoughts and favorite mysteries in the comments below. Your curiosity fuels this exploration, and if you want to continue unraveling the secrets of the past with us, be sure to subscribe. We are just getting started, and there are countless more stories waiting to be told, one incredible rune at a